Orlando, Florida hosted America's first Christmas, and their plans for Christmas dinner gave Florida the wild pigs we see today.
And they brought a herd of pigs with them.
We'll share the little-known stories and customs that go back hundreds of years for Christmas in Florida. Hello, I'm Craig Patrick, and we'll start with the story of the Christmas flower and how this plant got connected to Christmas in the first place, and how the poinsettia business took off in Manatee County. These flaming red Christmas plants started in Mexico. As legend has it, a girl planted weeds near a nativity scene, and they bloomed into flaming red stars on Christmas. Then Joel Poinsett, our ambassador to Mexico, brought the Christmas flower to the United States in the 1800s, and we named it after him. From there, the LA Times tracked the rise of poinsettias to the Ecke family farm in Southern California. They promoted their poinsettias by giving huge displays to Johnny Carson every year, and the king of late night admired and promoted them to a national audience.
If you had them, you'd have called them poinsettias.
Sales took off, and the U.S. adopted Mexico's tradition as a staple of Christmas.
From now on, it's poinsettia.
And while the Ecke spread the poinsettia craze from California,
nonstop. Go, go, go.
the Orban family made it take off in Bradenton, Florida.
This is Marty Orban.
Marty Orban ran the family farm for many years. It all started with Marty's great-uncle Martin and Father Bill. The family started growing poinsettias in the 1940s, and their Florida operations took off in the 1970s.
And my son is working to take over at some point here.
Sadly, Marty passed away during the 2019 harvest. But his son Tyler took over, now the fourth generation to run the family business.
It's important to me. I definitely want to make him proud and make my grandpa proud and the rest of the community and family and everyone else.
He took us inside their nurseries when they were shipping around 200,000 blooming plants to stores across the nation.
But a lot of those are red and pink and white. And then you get into the novelties.
You'll find many of these plants in Publix supermarkets. The Orbans have partnered with Publix since 1953.
I actually always look at the tag and go, oh, look, that's us.
They start with unrooted cuttings from South America, then stick them in pots and mist them for 3 weeks to get them going. They start growing these big ones in July, and the smaller ones a few weeks later.
They finish into what you have behind me right now.
While many people discard poinsettias after the holidays, you can keep them healthy all year. Find a bright location on your patio. Don't overwater, baby. Water just once a week, and when the nights get longer, they can bloom again for next Christmas.
We get to watch them grow, and then they start changing, and it's like, yay!
Of course, long before the Orban family turned Bradenton into poinsettia country, Florida was built on the citrus industry. And that brings us to one of Europe's and then Florida's longest running and little known Christmas traditions. You may know the custom of Christmas stockings goes back to the stories of St. Nicholas leaving gifts in children's socks on Christmas Eve. Then Clement Clark Moore penned The Night Before Christmas. Stockings were hung by the chimney with care, and Santa has filled them with candy and toys on Christmas Eve ever since.
Ho, ho, ho!
But if you dig deeper into the stories of yesteryear, legend speaks of St. Nicholas specifically tossing balls of gold into young girls' stockings to spare them from suffering. Balls of gold, which people in Europe liken to a rare and exotic fruit we call oranges.
They would have to have come in from Italy, and so they were expensive, they were a luxury item, they were exotic, and so it's also round and a little golden in shape if you use some imagination.
And then the people of Europe discovered a new world, tailor-made for growing citrus. Florida and California produced millions of oranges, and the industry heavily promoted them as one of Santa's favorites, a must-have in any good little boy's or girl's stocking.
Where does he get the oranges? Because they don't grow in the North Pole.
No, I assume he has a Southern Florida supplier.
Who's the supplier?
I don't know.
Well, back then all the suppliers got in on it. The Sun-Kissed Courier wrote, "It is wise for Santa to give this fruit to his small believers rather than filling their stockings with cheap artificial candy." And so in Florida, the land of plentiful citrus, Santa became well known for leaving his favorite fruit in the toe of the stocking.
My parents, of course, grew up probably in the Depression, so that's what they got, so that they just passed it on down to us.
And that's how the tradition spread through Florida in the 1930s. Families reeling in poverty from the Great Depression had to show their love by picking their gifts for free.
You can go out, you can pick it. It is affordable, it's accessible, and it's something that they've brought into the family.
And the custom continues for families today if they know the story of the gold balls from Europe or the fruit that drove the agricultural gold rush in Florida.
It really is important to remember that connection to some of the simpler things here in Florida as well as in life.
Well, these days kids ask Santa for a lot of stuff besides oranges. And there's a certain city east of Orlando where families like to drop off their wish lists for a pretty good reason.
Every December, families flock to a small town east of Orlando called Christmas to postmark their cards from Christmas.
The local people try to stay away at Christmas time because it's so crazy.
Same goes to the small Ohio town called Rudolph.
This is from Wappingers Falls, New York.
Thank you for taking care of those Christmas cards.
Oh, no problem with that.
This custom of sending mass-produced Christmas cards started in 19th century England with a postal worker named Henry Cole. He was getting a lot of mail and was too busy to reply to each letter as Victorian etiquette required.
That was the inspiration for the first mass-produced greeting card.
That first mass-produced card featured a family toasting the season. Cole didn't realize how much a toast would offend the prudes of his age.
It was actually the Temperance League that didn't care for that so much. They thought that it was encouraging drinking. And so the first Christmas card didn't get a lot of favorable response. It took a few years, a couple decades actually.
But by the start of the 20th century, mass-produced cards took off from Great Britain to the United States, and Florida in particular.
Well, Florida, for people who didn't live here, Florida was exotic. And with the tropical plants of oranges and poinsettias growing, added lots of color to the landscape.
Tourists love to send Florida cards to their freezing friends and loved ones around the world. The most sought-after cards delivered greetings from Florida.
You're not going to find greetings from New Jersey.
Not usually.
Greetings from Delaware.
Not as striking.
Idaho.
Not unless you're really into potatoes.
By the start of the 21st century, card sales did start dropping as email took off and then the Great Recession hit.
When you're on a fixed income, you can't send a lot of cards.
But the analysts who projected the cards are going extinct appear to have misjudged millennials. As they celebrate big milestones in their lives, they're propping up the holiday card business.
I think people are moving back to mailing the cards.
Sales slumped to record lows 5 years ago, but then stabilized and started ticking up, keeping the tradition alive and strong.
There's nothing quite like holding an actual card in your hand and knowing that it came from someone who cared.
Coming up, see how Florida hosted America's first Christmas with explorers who landed on the shores of Tampa Bay. And Bishop Gregory Parks explains how Christmas celebrations have changed, why the church picked December 25th, and the meaning of the 12 days of Christmas.
Well, historians tie many of our modern Christmas traditions and icons to New York, but the explorers brought Christmas to Florida long before New York even existed.
You may know Spanish explorers landed in Bradenton nearly 500 years ago. De Soto National Park marks the spot for Hernando de Soto and his Spanish expedition. But you may not know these early explorers also celebrated America's first Christmas, or rather they celebrated in a land that would become the United States nearly 250 years later.
Soto brought priests along, and that as observant Catholics, they would have had a Christmas Mass.
De Soto and more than 600 others left Tampa Bay in 1539 and tracked north. And archaeologists found the spot where they settled for Christmas. Today, it's a small park near downtown Tallahassee.
Although it probably did not resemble the Christmas trees and Santa Claus that we associate with Christmas, it would have been more of a solemn occasion with a Mass.
The archaeologists found a lot of artifacts from the site.
And that type of pipe is actually made in Tampa Bay.
And they found pig bones, which may suggest their Christmas Day feast included pork.
To avoid starvation, they brought a herd of pigs with them which probably introduced wild pigs to the southeast.
Archaeologist Dr. Dan Seinfeld said they also raided the Native Americans' food supply, and they did not write about their Christmas celebration because it was not exactly a time of peace.
We have evidence historically of conflict with the Appalachee, fighting because the Appalachee fiercely resisted the Spanish occupation.
This was a dangerous military expedition that sought conquest over peace. But our legislature and historians say it was also a critical turning point for all of us, well worth remembering long beyond Christmas.
Of course, Christmas changed a lot through the years, and it took off and evolved in some ways you may not expect. And so we asked Bishop Gregory Parks, who leads the Catholic Diocese of St. Petersburg, to take us through some of the history. Well, Bishop Parks, Merry Christmas. Thank you for joining us.
Merry Christmas to you, Craig.
Let's start with the biblical origins of the Nativity, the birth of Jesus. You have the Gospels of Matthew, the Gospel of Luke. They are silent on the actual date of Jesus' birth.
They are, and also each gospel speaks about the birth of Jesus in a different way. In fact, the Gospel of Mark goes right into the preaching of John the Baptist. Matthew speaks about Jesus' birth, but it is really the Gospel of Luke which gives us a more detailed account of the birth of Jesus Christ and how that came about.
And it took a few hundred years into the 4th century for the church to designate a date.
It sure did. And in fact, speaking of the Bible doesn't tell us the actual date that Christ was born. It was the first emperor, Constantine, in the year 336, who designated December 25th as the date that we would celebrate the birth of Jesus. Pope Julius I, a number of years later, made that official on our calendar. And so that's why we celebrate on December 25th.
And Constantine picked a date in which pagans had already celebrated their sun god, Mithra, in which there were already raucous celebrations surrounding Saturnalia. It was a day of feasting and a bit of raucous partying, was it not?
It certainly was, and it was a pagan feast, as you said, coinciding with the winter solstice. So it was the time of the year where the sun was out for the shortest period of time and marked a transition from darkness to a greater increase in light. And that may have been a motivation for setting the date of Jesus' birth as December 25th, was not only to replace that pagan feast with a Christian celebration, but also to mark a time in our history, our faith history, with Jesus Christ being the new light coming into the world and piercing the darkness.
Getting into the Gospel of Luke, the story of the census, the trip to Bethlehem, you have a number of scholars, including some who taught me in parochial schools, who note that Jesus may well have been born in or near Nazareth and not in Bethlehem, but it is unimportant to the broader story.
It is really. I mean, when we talk about date and actual location, we do believe it was Bethlehem, and there is a basilica there today to mark the spot where we believe he was born. However, really, the date is almost inconsequential. It's really the event that's important. The fact that God loved us so much that he sent his son, and sent him as a child, born as an infant, who would become our Savior.
And the church picked a date known for revelry. And then through the passage of time in the 1600s, you have the Protestant Reformation, you have the Puritans in New World America, Oliver Cromwell in England, who don't like those celebrations. It goes underground.
Well, it sure did, and particularly with the Puritans here in the United States, up in colonial parts of the U.S. in Massachusetts. When the Puritans settled there, they didn't particularly like the revelry and all the celebration, the festivity, the feasting. They thought that it detracted from the true spiritual significance of that day. So they tried to suppress it. But ultimately it did come back and was recognized as a day to celebrate a very important religious event, the birth of Jesus.
And this is something that Christian denominations have in common to this day. It is a period of celebration, an outward celebration beyond the church.
Oh, it certainly is. In fact, Christmas, it's kind of interesting because we spend so much time preparing to celebrate Christmas, and then the day comes, Christmas Day, and it almost seems like it ends for many people right after Christmas. For us as Catholics, as Christians, really Christmas Day marks the beginning of the Christmas season, which lasts 12 days till the Feast of the Epiphany.
And the Epiphany, noting the date, the Magi.
That's great. These astrologers or magi, these wise men who look to the sky for signs of world events, they came to see this newborn king that they had heard about, and they presented him gifts, as would be the custom at that time.
You see a lot of people stringing up lights as well, and before the days of Edison, candles, of course. What does that signify, and how does it relate to the birth of Jesus?
Well, we look to Jesus as the light of the world, and so before him there was periods of darkness in the world, and the birth of Jesus represents a new period of light coming into the dark, which pierces the darkness and ushers in a new period of hope.
It brings us to the story of 12 Days of Christmas. There's some symbolism in these lyrics, are there not?
There sure are. That popular hymn today was actually developed and composed as a way of teaching, particularly children, some of the primary tenets or teachings of our Christian faith. So each of the symbols in the song represents something in particular. Two turtle doves would represent the two testaments, both the Old Testament as well as the New Testament. The 5 golden rings represent the first 5 books of the Bible, called the Pentateuch.
4 calling birds, the Gospels?
The Gospel, so exactly. So each of those symbols represents a teaching of our Christian faith.
And the central teaching, partridge in a pear tree?
Well, the partridge was known to be a bird which would actually sacrifice itself to protect its young, so it would give its own life. And that, of course, symbolizes Jesus Christ himself, who gave his life for us.
And in celebrating Christmas through 12 days, what should one take beyond this into a period of ordinary time throughout the year?
Well, I would say Christmas is, again, a celebration, but it doesn't end. You know, it really should be in our hearts, that spirit of love for each other, hopefully a spirit of peace, a spirit of hope.
Bishop Parks, Merry Christmas, and thank you for your time.
Merry Christmas, Craig. Take care.
Coming up, we'll switch gears to the magic of Santa. Engineers plot his most likely path around the world. Before we bring in Santa Claus, we want to show you how engineers figured out his trip around the world.
47 factorial divided by 6 factorial.
Scientists have figured out the math. Santa Claus must fly more than 3,600 miles per second to visit all the nice children of Earth.
I'm fast.
To pull it off in one night, engineers say Santa may not take off from the North Pole. They say his most efficient route would start near Kazakhstan. From there, Santa would have to fly against the Earth's rotation and cross the date line. That way, scientists say he could, in fact, reach 2.5 billion homes between Christmas Eve and Christmas morning. Now, he would only have 34 microseconds per stop here, but that may be just enough to protect the presents and stay one step ahead of the Grinch.
Santa's all, I'm coming down the chimney and I'm going to put stuff in your stocking. I'm going to put stuff under your tree. And I'm right behind him like, skee!
At that speed, you may think Santa's sleigh would hit so much air resistance it would catch on fire.
You would think so.
How do you pull it off?
We have a magic gel we put on it.
And that allows the sleigh to travel through folds of time and space.
We fly faster than most of the molecules move.
So you're going through extra dimensions?
On occasion.
If that's the case, never mind a route. He can deliver gifts as we speak. How many gifts did you just deliver?
More than I could count.
Well, he just did it again. String theory, or M theory, suggests there are actually 11 different dimensions that weave in and out of our time and space. And Santa may be using at least 10 of them. Can you take me to the North Pole?
Don't usually do that, Craig, but if you want to go.
Oh, that's kind of weird. And so goes the science of Santa Claus.
Ho, 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 ho! Merry Christmas! Christmas, everyone! Ho, 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 ho.
Coming up, we'll wrap up with a stroll through one of the most colorful streets in Florida on Christmas night. Well, thank you for watching our Christmas special. We'll close out our celebration with a trip to the town of Celebration, because a couple of neighbors started something there called the Lights on Jeter Bend that just keeps growing every year.
Relax and enjoy the Lights on Jeter Bend.
First house was our home, decorated for 1 year, and then I got approached by a couple of neighbors and they said, we'd like to participate in that, and so kind of just grew over time. Basically are now up to 11 homes.
I have two favorites, the snow and the fire. Everyone loves the fire. I up it a little bit each year to change things. I added a snow machine this year.
We had an actual lady come up to me during the display, said, thank you so much for doing this. We've fallen on hard times, and this is literally our Christmas.
The children, when they show up and they actually thank me, their parents thank me, thank us for doing what we do out here.
This is a great way for a family to enjoy and come out and have a nice time.